on different aspects of India's energy transition. So as you many of you have participated earlier, we have discussed on distributed renewable energy, solar agricultural feeders, data for energy transition, and viability of utilities. So in this session, we are going to discuss on the urgency and the significance of advanced power system planning, particularly in a high RE scenario. So as we all have been observing over last 1.5 decade, there has been significant development in the energy technology space. We have now RE is now cost competitive. We have energy storage technologies which are projected to be cost competitive very soon. And at the same time, we are seeing aggressive electrification, particularly in transportation, and the huge potential in industrial process as well. And simultaneously, we are also seeing demand side options opportunities coming up, which sort of increasing the variability and uncertainty in the electricity system, making long-term planning much more complex. And uh, this development combined together, they're sort of disrupting the predictability that was particularly prevalent in India's electricity sector and planning as well. So we need to move beyond traditional way of planning for energy systems and look forward to more advanced system planning. And today we have National Renewable Energy Laboratory of the US Department of Energy. So they have been working with several Indian states, looking at how the states can cope with the situation and plan better for the energy future. So they're going to present a sort of roadmap for the states, for the Indian states to for power system planning. And we have a fabulous panel to discuss this topic and draw insights from different areas. And let me introduce the panelists. So we have Mohit Joshi, who is an energy system modeler and analyst at NREL. So he's going to start with a presentation on NREL's observation in states and the roadmap. And then we have Amy Rose, who is a researcher at NREL, and her expertise includes power sector planning, production cost modeling, regional power pool, and grid integration of RE. Then we have Mr. Praveen Gupta, who is Chief Engineer and Head of Integrated Resource Planning at Central Electricity Authority. So we bring in, Mr. Gupta will bring in the Indian experience and challenges. And then we have Daljit Singh, who is a fellow at Center for Social and Economic Progress. And Daljit has more than 2 decades of experience working on India's electricity sector, as well as another 2 decades of experience working in US as well on electricity regulatory organizations. And Daljit and I, a couple of years back, actually looked into 3 states to understand how the DISCOMs are doing resource planning. So he'll share those insights. Uh, uh, Finally, we have Mr. Jagbanta Ninthozam, who's a manager at Rocky Mountain Institute, India. So RMI also working with few states on advanced power system planning. So we look forward to Jagbanta for state experience. With that, I now hand over to Mohit for the preliminary presentation. We'll have a short presentation and then we'll get into discussion. Mohit, over to you.
Thanks, Ashwini. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. My name is Mohit Joshi, and I work as an energy system modeler and analyst at the National Renewable Energy Lab. The topic of today's presentation is the roadmap for advanced power system planning in Indian states with high RE. As Ashwini mentioned earlier, we have been working with states, and also we have a lot of experience working in India. So this roadmap we have chalked out based on our experience so far, and then also what is the need of the future system with high RE and energy storage. So that is going to be the topic of discussion for today. Okay, so before going into the main topic, I'll just give you an overview of NREL. I'm sure many of you must be knowing about NREL. So NREL stands for the National Renewable Energy Lab. It is one of the national labs of the United States Department of Energy. It has around 2,000 employees with more than 400 early career researchers and visiting scientists. It has a world-class facilities, renowned technical experts, and then it has more than 800 partnerships with industry, academia, and government. And we have a lab at the Colorado State, where it operates as a living laboratory. Many scientists are working simultaneously on different areas related to renewable energy. Uh, so I'll just give you a background of the program that we are doing right now. So this program is supporting Indian states with renewable energy integration. So we have worked in a couple of states, and we also have planned to work in a couple of more states. And then the objective of this program is threefold. One is to support the states in the long-term power system planning, also support states in managing the distributed energy resources, and also capacity building at the state level, which we feel is very important, and we are supporting through this program. In this program, the latest work that NREL has done right now is to publish 3 fact sheets right now. So we are planning to publish 3 fact sheets pretty soon, but the third one, which is the roadmap for advanced power system planning, is the topic for today. And then we published this fact sheet just today, and you can see the web link on the right hand side. So the idea of this work is to help Indian states understand how to do a long-term planning study, what are the advancements in the long-term planning study right now, and then how should they move forward going into future. We also plan to publish a 4th fact sheet, which is like the future of power system planning in India. Like, we all understand that the penetration of RA and clean energy resources are going to increase, and then people are talking about decarbonization, like 100% clean energy in future. So how the planning would look like in that scenario, that's going to be the topic for the 4th fact sheet. And if you want to learn more about this program that we are supporting, you can visit the link at the bottom to get a more understanding of the work that we have done for the states. Okay, so moving on to the discussion that we have today on the planning side. So the main idea of doing this work is the need to evolve planning when we have increasing share of RE and storage in the system. So we all understand the concept of like a traditional planning approach, like where we have base load, like a peaking plant, or an intermediate dispatchable plant. So if you see the plot on the left-hand side, it just represents the base load paradigm. Like, and you can understand from Indian context this to be something which we used to do before when RE was not there. Like, there used to be a base load, there would be some peaking plant. So the planning was mostly capacity based, determining base load and then peaking capacity. But then as we move forward, and then if you consider present scenario like 2021, and then also, I mean, you can also consider the right side plot as 2030 future, where we will have something like 20%, 30% penetration of RE, then the situation becomes different than what we used to have earlier. So here, I mean, when we have RE, the base load plants would need to like flex more. You need different type of resources to manage that flexibility or the variability, whatever you say in terms of RE. So the focus now shifts from capacity based planning to like consideration of various cost and benefit derived from VRE, and then how we can integrate that this with the system, and then what's the flexibility requirement of the system. And then the bottom chart, you can think of something like a 2050 scenario for India, like, or maybe even beyond that, when you have all RE, like full RE, and then you will have newer technologies like energy storage coming into picture. You will have greater energy efficiency. You will have demand response. You will have coupling with different sectors like transport, heating and cooling, and all those kind of things would present a new paradigm for power system planning. So the idea of showing all this is that as we have more penetration of RE, the concept of base load is not there. Like, there is nothing called base load, and then people should plan based on VRE, which will basically provide you a bulk of energy, and then all other resources should be planned according to that. So the objective of this slide is to convey the fact that the base load paradigm is changing, and then we need to evolve our planning practices as we move with higher penetration of RE and storage. So now we talk about what's a long-term planning study look like. So from our understanding, it's a study which is a process of inquiry. So like we inquire different aspects of power system at every stage of planning. So it has a three-step process. One is prepare, model, and communicate. In the prepare step, we scope our study, we select a power system model, like we do, like what we want to do. For example, we want to run a capacity expansion model, we want to do a power flow model, we want to run a production cost model, and then we collect data for that model, develop scenarios, build the model, and then obviously report and refine the results. So the main objective of a long-term planning study is to build confidence among the stakeholders. So this is what we do and call a stakeholder consultation. And also the other objective of a long-term planning study is to evaluate different policy and regulatory scenarios to achieve the desired result that we want from a planning study. There have been a lot of advancements over the years in capacity expansion models. So there were times when we used to run like only a peak and off-peak scenario, and then maybe a couple of seasons or maybe 3-4 seasons. But then now with the advancement of computational power, we can do much more than that. Like we can study many different scenarios. We can study many different seasons. We can study many different time blocks during the year. So this slide just talks about what are the advancements in the capacity expansion model. I won't go into detail because we have a much greater topic coming up. So I'll just mention that some of them, for example, dynamic operating reserve, we can model the reserves to be variable with the renewable energy penetration as you build more. We can estimate RE curtailment. We can represent many technologies for deep decarbonization. We can model energy storage technologies. We can also understand the impact on climate change. And also we can, model many sectors into this planning process and then see how they interact with each other. This is just an example of advancement in capacity expansion model. As I was telling earlier, on the left, you can find that number of time slices. So on the x-axis is the calendar month, and on the y-axis is the number of hours during that month. So you can see that in a normal paradigm, we generally study peak and off peak, but then as we move forward, as we have more computational power, we study different time blocks like night, sunrise, morning, afternoon, sunset. So we can study more as we move forward, and the next slide will talk about that only. Like when we have like RE, why do we want to like study different time slices? So you can see here, you can see on the x-axis as the off-peak and peak at the extreme left and extreme right. Those are the standard ones that we generally study. But then as we have RE in the system, there are some other time periods which are interesting to the planner. For example, sunrise, when you have your RE ramping up, so your net load goes down, so your conventional technology has to respond to that. Similarly, afternoon, when you have the minimum net load, evening, when you have this, sun setting, and then your net load ramp is increasing. So all these different time slices are becoming important for the planners because of RE and energy storage technology. So that's why we need to study them. And on the right, if you see, you can see the example of a higher geographical resolution. Generally, if you see, we can study one region as one node, but as you have like advancement in the CEM or the capacity expansion model, you can study each state as one node, or maybe you can study like going further down into that state, like many sub discoms, you can say, many small resource region areas you can study. So that's how the capacity expansion modeling has improved or evolved over the years. Now, this is the main topic or main slide that we will be discussing in the subsequent part of this webinar, which is the roadmap to advanced planning activities at the Indian states. So this roadmap has been evolved based on the needs and the best practices around the world. And we think that this will help Indian states to minimize their cost and achieve higher penetration of clean energy resources. We have categorized all these action points or activities based on the level of effort and priority. So if you see on the extreme left, like the highest priority items and the low effort items, basically these are the low hanging fruits. You don't have to do much investment, you don't have to do much technical advancement, you just can quickly add this to your planning process. So that's the one thing that we would like to convey here. And then by no means we are trying to say here that Indian states are not doing this. It's just that some states might be doing something, some states might be doing something. So we want to just compile every activity possible to improve the planning processes in this chart. And then maybe states can pick and choose what they are not doing and then what they want to implement in future. But then there are certainly some low hanging fruits which can be taken out pretty easily. And I'm not going to discuss every action point because some of them are pretty obvious, like increasing coordination between the states and region, and then you can go and then check our latest fact sheet. But then I will spend some time on a few of the important points. For example, the long-term plan should be resource adequate. So when I say resource adequate, it means that it should be able to survive in different scenarios. Like there should not be any resource deficiency. So for that to happen, we generally take two parameters. One is planning reserve margin, and the other is loss or load probability. So these are two important parameters that we should include in our planning study. So PRM is a uh, margin that we include in a planning study to take care of outages. Uh, and then it is different from operating reserve margin. I mean, generally people say, okay, the NAP in India provides for 5% spinning reserve, but then spinning reserve is basically for operating or for the operational time horizon. But then for the planning, we need planning reserve margin, which is supposed to be greater than the spinning reserves. So when you have sufficient PRM, then you will have less loss of load probability, and that would signify that your long-term plan is resource adequate. So generally, across the world, and then also NERC recommended PRM in the range of 13 to 17%. So that is important to take while doing a planning study, and also that would result into, or that should result into a 1 day in 10-year kind of LOLP, which is a industry accepted target for LOLP. The next is a capacity credit. So we know that when we're talking about PRM, it's basically how much capacity can contribute to that PRM. So for a thermal power plant, having no fuel shortages can give you the full capacity as the firm capacity towards meeting that PRM. But then sometimes people say, okay, RE and storage, I mean, we don't know when they will operate. I mean, there is a variability associated with RE, and then storage would work based on the operating conditions. So we would not take PRM for them. But then what we are trying to say here is that storage and RE can provide that firm capacity, and you should include that in your planning study. If you don't include that part of RE and storage into the planning model, then you would see fewer investments, and then you would see higher cost plan. Like you would see additional investment in other technologies which might not be relevant if you are sufficiently crediting RE and storage with the firm capacity. So it is important for the planners to account for capacity credit. And the simplest, I mean, there are like complicated probabilistic approaches towards capacity credit, but then the simplest a state can do is like use the capacity factor of that RE, and then assume that's the capacity credit for, or the firm capacity contribution of that particular resource. So that's the simplest. There could be, as the states evolve their planning process, they could go for a probabilistic, more sophisticated approaches. The next is that when you have high RE system, you need to have more resolution for power system planning. For example, you need to study more time periods. Like you need to move away from peak and off peak. You should study more balancing areas that will help you understand the transmission constraints better. And all these like more temporal resolution, more geographical resolution will help you in your flexibility needs assessment. we all understand that RE is weather dependent and the location dependent. So we need to account that exactly in our planning study. So generally, we see that people take or planners take a representative profile for a whole region. So you need to go and then obviously represent that geographic RE diversity, and also you need to take multi-year RE data. For example, because if you take only 1 year RE data, it becomes difficult to get those inter-annular variability. And the last option or the last action point is that we need to move towards a model-based approaches where we like use some tools to co-optimize generation and transmission. And since in future we would have a system with like 100% clean energy, and then so we need to move towards tool to incorporate the interaction between different sectors, and then that will help the planners. So just at the end, I have like just I'll take 2-3 minutes more because it's I think already my 15 minutes are over. So I'll just present a picture of like a future power system plan. So the existing power system planning is something like this. We do a capacity expansion study. Sometimes we do a production cost study, or sometimes we do a power flow study, or maybe we do both studies. But then as we move towards a future, we would have a different uh, components of power sector coming into a power system planning. For example, we need to have a dedicated demand modeling system. We need to have environmental analysis, reliability modeling, distribution side also need to be included in planning, and then also the impact of planning on jobs and also on economics. This All these blocks are not only one study, there are multiple things that you do. So this is an example from a like previous LA100 study that NREL has done. So it has a number of components starting from building load to an economic and impact analysis. So it's going to be pretty complicated, so it's important for us to start at this moment to manage that. Just to conclude, uh, power system planning need to evolve. We need to start those incremental changes right now. We should also make efforts to build capacity in model-based planning. And also the intersectoral linkages will be important. So we need to start thinking about that. So that's all from my side. Thank you, everyone. Over to Ashwini.
Yeah, thanks, Mohit, for this insightful presentation and presenting the roadmap. I'll now move to the panelists for the initial remarks on what you just presented. So may I request Mr. Gupta to give his initial remarks, and I request panelists to stick to 5 minutes timeline so that we can discuss some questions coming up. And I request the participants to put their questions in Q&A section. We'll pick up them after this initial remarks. Mr. Gupta?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. Thank you, Ashwini. Very nice presentation has been given by Mr. Mohit. He has covered what are the basic advantages of having sophisticated modeling tools. As you know that India is in a transition of having low RE to high RE scenario now. And the CA, as you know, has been doing modeling studies since very long, because National Electricity Plan we have to publish every 5 years. But we have also seen the changes after advent of RE in the system. As we go on adding RE, there are certain things which are there, which needs to be studied before we can have a robust long-term capacity expansion. I think Mohit's presentation has covered many of these aspects and what is the need of having a modeling approach now. And we feel that states should also come up with these, they should try to use these tools. I'll come to the problems and other things during the discussion, but I think Mohit has covered many things which are needed for the discussion to go about. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gupta. May I now request Jagwanta to share his experience of working with other states as well? What have you observed from other states, Jagwanta?
Hi, thank you, Ashwini, and kudos to Mohit for an excellent presentation. It will be a lot of repeat if because a lot of the stuff that we have observed in our own modeling work has been covered by Mohit in his presentation. But few things I just wanted to observe and relate to the state work is that, of course, as Praveen sir has also indicated, like the system is changing. We're moving from an era of capacity expansion to capacity optimization. We're moving from an era of creation of electron to balancing of electron. And then we're moving in a third point being like the movement from quantity to quality of power. And all this is affecting how we treat the systems. And this is also within the context of new concerns around the role of coal, role of new assets and new resources like storage and DR coming in. As has been alluded, sectors are getting intertwined. EVs are coming into the picture, an area RMI really works on. And the last point, which has been factored in, which is increasingly in our thinking at RMI, is how do you future costs of resilience into your power system planning. And that's something that traditional planning approach, and that's probably where I can hammer a little bit, lacks is like the traditional modeling approach will optimize based on current economics, but what about the potential economics of adaptation to extreme events? None of we haven't really thought about. I think there are early thinkings right now, but we haven't really thought about it from the perspective of system planning. How do you mainstream resilience into the way you plan your systems? And that's something that we're increasingly thinking, and that's being done at least at a theoretical level in the work we're doing with the Pacific Islands in the Caribbean. The second point is, of course, I kind of alluded, is to do with the fact that the sectors are intertwined. So initially, the first capacity expansion model that I built and conducted was back into 2012 for Bangladesh, and as Mohit said, essentially you're optimizing for peak and off the baseload plants based purely on the economics of things. And that era has completely changed now that I think about it. At that point, transport was never a concern when you think about how do you, integrate it in the work in your systems planning. Now, sectors, your buildings, as they electrify more and more, your transportation as they electrify more and more, and the impact of that on your grid, on your demand increases. It essentially becomes a lot more crucial from modeling and system planning perspective to account for it. And of course, on a systems on a computational power level, as the granularity increase, as your power increases, you can get more granular. Data is also a concern as you get more granular, but the work that NREL folks at NREL has been doing has been pretty important in bridging some of those gaps. Last point I wanted to make is to do with the fact that the new assets that we have identified, including storage and including demand response, and an area where both areas we're working with in some of the states. The fact that we're not being able to actually value the economic value of these assets doesn't makes us not plan at the optimal level for some of these new assets coming online. We know that battery is not just about RE integration. There's a lot of other value stream on grid side that batteries can provide. What does that mean? If you're able to monetize those value stream, does that mean, how does that impact and how do you factor in from a modeling perspective, the economics of the asset? Those are the questions that are becoming more and more crucial. And I'm not saying these are not things that nothing that Mohit hasn't alluded, but just wanted to reinforce it with our own observation with the work we are doing. So yeah, that's from me from initial observation point of view. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jagwant. So, taking on your point, first point you made, the shift from capacity expansion to capacity optimization. I remember in 2016-17, Daljit and I did field work in a few states, and we were talking to system planners and system operators particularly, and we asked them, how do you optimize your resources? And the answer was, until very recent, all the states and utilities, they're struggling with scarcity, and the only objective was to add capacity, and the only option for planning was how do we load set and where to load set. And from there we are heading towards a much complex system and much faster as well. May I now invite Daljit for his initial remarks? You're on mute, Daljit.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. I want to thank CPR for this opportunity to participate in this panel discussion. And congratulations to Mohit and the NWEL team for an excellent and succinct presentation on the issues involved in long-term planning as we move into this new world with a much greater contribution from RE. I particularly liked three things that he in his presentation. One is that in the future, we're going to move from looking at resource adequacy from the point of view of generation capacity to energy adequacy, or what's known as an energy first approach. That is, you meet customer demand from clean energy, RE storage and demand response, and then fill in remaining requirements with dispatchable resources. The second thing that I really liked about his presentation is that he's drawing this attention to the need for increased granularity in planning, both at the geographical level and also temporal. And the third thing that I liked is he drew attention to the incredible increase in complexity that we will see in planning in the future. Now, I want to elaborate on two issues that are going to be of particular importance for India in the future. The first is this issue of addressing uncertainty and managing risk, something that Mohit touched upon, so did Mr. Gupta and Jagdamba. The power sector is going to face much greater uncertainty in the future from very many sources. We're going to have new supply and storage technologies. We've got distributed energy resources and other behind the meter technologies. And we could see significant load migration as self-generation becomes more attractive. Then the biggest uncertainty will be weather, which as we know, can be quite erratic. Until now, weather mostly affected electricity demand. But when you have much higher contributions from RE, it's also going to affect supply. And to complicate this even further, weather patterns themselves are changing. And the future is very likely going to be different from the past. And that could make forecasting even more difficult. Now, our current planning processes in the power sector are not, don't address uncertainty very well, if at all. And mostly what we see are sensitivity cases with a higher or lower value of usually load growth, often arbitrarily set at plus minus 10% from a base case value. A more rigorous approach would be to use, say, the 90th percentile and 10th percentile of the historical value of the variable. But more broadly, sensitivity analysis is really best used to identify the most important variables, and it's not really a good way of testing the robustness of a plan. So how do we best address uncertainty and minimize risk in long-term planning? There are a variety of techniques to carry out uncertainty analysis. There's scenario analysis, sensitivity analysis, probabilistic analysis, and the newcomer, which is option analysis. Now, each of these has its advantages and shortcomings. In our report on how states are doing resource planning, which Ashwini mentioned at the beginning, we show how these techniques can be woven together in a logical progression so that the advantages of each can be optimally harnessed. And just to talk a little bit more about one technique that is more recent, has not been used much, and that's this option analysis or the use of optionality. This technique recognizes that uncertainties reduce over time as better information becomes available. Therefore, by breaking decisions into phases, we can develop a response that is adaptive. Now, modularity in resource additions helps greatly in having this kind of adaptive planning. And fortunately, RE is much more amenable to these modular additions. But this modularity is coming in other areas also. So for example, with nuclear plant additions, which until now have been very, very chunky additions of over 1,000 megawatts each, There's a lot of work being done on small and modular reactors, which would be very, very good to do to help with the modularization. But and I realize that many people, I mean, there are all issues about managing nuclear waste, etc., and I'm not going to get into that here. But more broadly, given the extent of uncertainty, instead of developing a plan, we should begin to think of developing a strategy for the power sector in the coming decades. And the kind of adaptive planning that I've described here is one step in that direction. The second issue I wanted to talk about is about institutional and organizational challenges in implementing the kind, the effective long-term planning, the kind that Mohit discussed. The locus of this planning will be the distribution companies or the load serving entities. And Mohit's second last slide showed how complicated this planning will become and the various tasks that these DISCOMs will have to undertake. So the question I want to ask is, are our DISCOMs ready? And I think most of you will agree with me that the answer is no, they're not ready. And I realize I'm running out of time. I would have liked to talk more about the reasons for this poor long-time planning by DISCOMs and the institutional challenges, the institutional changes that are going to be required to remedy this situation. I hope I can cover some of these during the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thanks, Daljit. Thanks for raising the concern on DISCOM and utility capacity to implement this kind of planning. So we'll pick up that in the Q&A. Now I request Amy to give her remarks.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me and for the presentation, Mohit. I think you gave a very nice motivation for why power system planning methods need to evolve and some useful examples of how this has been done with existing models and studies. And I also appreciate the roadmap you outlined, including not just a list of things that have to happen, but a prioritized list indicating where power system planners can start to implement these changes. I think it's important to emphasize that the types of advancements you have suggested are not just about getting better results. This is not simply a matter of modelers wanting to build more sophisticated models because we think it's fun, but rather for systems like India, where renewables are going to play a larger role. These advancements are really necessary to accurately capture how the future power system will operate and to plan a system that's reliable and resilient. Jag mentioned the need to start thinking about resilience in power sector planning, and I completely agree. Our recent experience in the US state of Texas in February this year illustrates how conventional planning practices that don't consider, for example, the full range of system contingencies that can result from changing weather patterns can lead to really severe consequences, which is also something that Daljit mentioned in his remarks, is needing to think more critically about, for example, weather patterns and the impact that could have on different aspects of the power sector. I would just add one further element that's worth pursuing in parallel to all of the activities that Mohit outlined in his roadmap, and that is greater coordination among power system modelers and power system planners in India at the central and the state level. So currently in India, there are multiple efforts underway at both the central and state level to design and implement least cost planning tools for the power sector. And this means multiple efforts to develop high quality input data and modeling tools. NREL is involved in one of these efforts with our READS capacity expansion model that we're using nationally, but also for state level planning. And to be clear, I'm not opposed to having multiple models or multiple groups developing planning models in India. I think having diverse approaches really helps create robust discussion, and we can learn from each other and gain greater insights around the drivers for power sector investments. But I do think there are a number of benefits we can realize if we have greater coordination among power system planners in the country. First, we could avoid duplicating efforts in certain areas. For example, developing the input data sets. The technology catalog for India that's under development by CEA and the Danish Energy Agency is a really good example of moving towards greater data sharing and also transparency in the model development process. And I'm really excited to see that come together. But it's also a useful way for us to get feedback from other modelers on our input data and assumptions, and then accelerate the pace of model development through peer-to-peer exchange. And finally, if we step away from being a modeler for a minute and think about this from the perspective of the public or MOP, it could be really confusing to see different or even conflicting results coming out of different planning studies. So if we as a modeling community are not talking to each other and not understanding these differences and communicating them clearly, we really can't expect a broader audience to understand them. And the result could be a general eroding of trust in power system models in general. So I would encourage all of us to keep talking to each other through forums like this and also outside of these webinars, and keep coordinating to try to improve in all of those areas. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amy, for highlighting the need for coordination. We actually need coordination at multiple levels, not just between the modelers, but at policy level, between different levels of governance for the sector as a whole. And we have been grappling with that. And the other interesting point you pointed out about the need for greater data sharing between different modeling groups and the community. So we in fact had a session as part of this series where we looked at the need for adequate data and accuracy of those data, timely reporting in one of the sessions, and how that is critical for planning for the transition. So we'll get into that point. So yeah, now I have some very interesting questions coming out of this. Yeah,
Ashwini, I would like to intervene. If you permit, I want to share some of the views which Amy has already given. So if you permit, can I do it now, or you want me to?
Sure.
Yeah, but I strongly support Amy, because whatever points I was having in my mind regarding coordination between the modelers, because CA is facing that kind of challenge. Everybody, I'm not saying everybody, many agencies are doing long-term planning studies and short-term planning studies nowadays. And that too, because since last 2 years, this trend has been observed that many agencies have come up with different studies. And there is a very conflicting results which they are showing. Somebody is showing so much battery is coming, so somebody is showing so much coal is coming. So there is an urgent need for having a standard guidelines where we can all finalize some things which are common to all, so that when we are comparing these studies, there is no discrepancy about the assumptions, because the modeling is the game of assumptions. If you change any assumption, the results will change drastically. And regarding the technology catalog, Amy has already told that CA has taken this initiative because we observed that there are so many different assumptions people are taking for different technologies based on their own interest. So with the Indo-Denmark collaboration, we have taken up this technology catalog development, and we are almost midway. We have collected a lot of data. And I'll request we have a workshop on 29th of this month. If somebody is interested, he can contact me, and we will surely be sending him the link of the workshop. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gupta. So may I start with a question for you? Of course, we need much more robust. We need much more robust planning for the sector, but so far it's the CEA who has been doing demand and capacity projection, and which is largely followed by the utilities at the state level. But going forward, this predictable approach will not work. We all agree on that. So how important is to harmonize this planning process? So do we need to continue with this central level planning, or we need to get down to state level, utility level sort of planning on that? And what will be the role of central agencies like CA in this ecosystem?
See, there is a misconception that we are making it's a national level planning, although, but like demand, we are not on our own, we are not projecting the demand. It is basically the inputs we are getting from each state, and there is a big committee where all experts are there in that committee, and we are in close interaction with the states at each level, and then we come up with the demand projections. So it is not that at national level we are doing it and then it is going to states. Of course, there is a you can see say that there is a gap between what is the actual and what we have been predicting. See, there are many reasons for that. It's not so. See, projections are always subject to variation. But when states are coming to us, they are giving some ambitious plans which they want to fulfill. Each state is having their own ambition that they will reach there, but in many cases they are not able to reach to that point. So we are already having discussions with states. All states are involved in this rigorous exercise of EPS, which we call it energy. This what we are publishing survey, electric power survey. Also during the planning, it's not like that we are taking just our plans and we are just passing it to states. We are getting all the inputs from states. What are their plans of having this capacity expansions? What are the plans of renewable energy, which they are thinking that they will come? So yes, of course, there is a need of harmonization. Still, we have a very long gap between what we think and what they think. And for that, as you see, that lot of efforts are being made now to interact with states individually and just ask them and uh, train them how we can best do the modeling using these sophisticated models. So states are having not that much capability to understand the modeling intricacies, because see, they have the habit of doing modeling through traditional ways. Like they are still doing, many states you will find that they are still doing Excel based this thing, but that will not work in case when we have more RE and battery energy storage system coming into the system. So of course, we feel that there is a standard guidelines which we need to be need to be developed for planning this thing, planning studies. Also, we should have a set of assumptions which we should take uniformly throughout the whole country. It should not be like that we are taking something battery costs some other trajectory and somebody is taking other trajectory. So for that technology catalog, we are already trying to develop. And CA has been already doing the state level studies. We are trying to build capacity for states like MP states we have already done. The problem which I feel is the collection of data. See, data availability is very poor. And as Mohit has already said, that we have to aggregate solar profiles and wind profiles. We have to assume that the whole profile of one place will be applicable to whole region. So, so we need to develop first what are the data requirements, because models are available. See, so many models are available throughout the country that, but only thing problem is that we don't have the data. Even at CA level, we face so much problem to get data of RE. Like we can talk about 15 minute, sub-hourly, 5 minutes, but there is no data available of RE generation. So there is no point having that facility in the model. So I feel that data collect standard formats for data, and states should try to see how best they can fulfill those data needs. Yeah, that's all.
Yeah, thank you. So that's fair enough. I mean, in fact, when we spoke to utilities in few states, we get to know that often the inputs from states are driven by sort of a reflection of political signals from the state government. So it's not the real demand trajectory or expectations. So yeah, as you rightly point out, there are two things coming from here. One is institutional capacity to do this sort of planning, and the other is data availability. Let's first pick up this institutional capacity. Daljit, you spoke about poor long-term planning at DISCOM level, and the institutional constraints, and what would be the institutional options. I mean, what sort of reforms we need there. So can you share in detail, but within 2-3 minutes, what do you
Yeah,
think?
yeah. So first, let me just talk about what are the shortcomings of how planning is done right now. And actually, I'm very worried that discoms, as they are today, are not going to be able to do even a fraction of the sort of things that Mohit talked about. And this doesn't mean, we've got some really good people. This is not a reflection on the people in these state discoms, but I think the whole system, and especially the political constraints they work under, makes things very difficult. So this is the just to summarize what are some of the problems in planning. This comes from a study that Ashwini and I did in 3 states to understand what are their resource planning and power procurement practices. And what we found was, first of all, it was essentially almost non-existent, any kind of real planning. And it's stymied by incredible interference by the state government, which Ashwini also alluded to. And the other thing is there's diffused responsibility and diluted accountability. Actually, I should give credit for that to my friend Ashwini. That what we found was in one of the states, we were trying to see which division is responsible for long-term resource planning. And what we found were there were 3 divisions responsible for different parts, what you would think as resource planning, but none of them was really responsible. The planning division, which we thought is who would be doing that, said they only looked at how many poles and wires and what all was required. And then we found out that the final decision on capacity additions was taken by an ad hoc committee. So this is how things are done. And there's inadequate analytical backup for many capacity additions. And there's almost no integrated considerations of all options to meet load. With actually evaluation of resources happens a single resource at a time. So what happens is usually you just look at what is the LSOE and is this good enough by some benchmark. You just apply 85% PLF and see how that is. And the other thing that actually makes it very difficult is there's no clear review of plants in the pipeline. So many of the utilities sign PPAs, and then these things, they are there for many, many years. They're well behind schedule, but they don't get canceled. So there's stuff in the pipeline, and the states just keep adding to that pipeline because they are in a rush, or they're worried that they won't have enough resources. And then, of course, the last point is that the uncertainty and risk management is completely ignored. I just want to add a little bit on what sort of organizational and institutional changes are going to be required to improve this resource plan. And Mr. Gupta also alluded to how how the situation that the capacity to do any kind of real planning in the states is very, very poor. And so the things that need to be done, one is just, and this would sound almost elementary, but we need to increase awareness of importance of long-term resource planning. that, you need to look at system costs. You need to look at system costs over a long period. You need to look at a mix of resources. You shouldn't be doing this one resource at a time. And as Mr. Gupta was talking about, you don't do this through Excel spreadsheets. You need to use models. So that's one part of it. But the other thing is there has to be a mandate to regulators to require long-term resource planning, and that's not there. So how do we get this? We need to develop a regulatory framework for resource. Either this goes either through legislation, a change in legislation, some amendment, or even a FOR could do this. But the thing to remember is these resource planning proceedings must happen at a regular interval. And even more important, they should be separated from tariff filings. What is happening in most states is resource capacity additions are evaluated at the time that tariffs are being set. And regulators are focused mostly on tariffs. They are not thinking about these, about capacity additions and so on. So it doesn't get the attention that it deserves, which is really ironical because our procurement costs are at least 70% of the costs that consumers pay. So if we are worried about making power affordable for Indian citizens, then we really, really, really need to focus on improving this type of long-term resource planning. And the last point is we will need to train regulatory and DISCOM staff in this type of long-term, and really it's going to be needed. It's a really very intensive sort of training is going to be required. Otherwise, we are just going to muddle along. Thank you.
Thanks, Daljit. Yeah, coming from here, so Mohit, you have been working with a few states. So what are the steps being taken by, and in fact, you are working with the progressive states in terms of RE integration. I mean, these are the states who have done more on RE. So what are the steps being taken in these states in terms of long-term planning? Are we seeing some sort of innovation and some sort of change in these states? And what would be the immediate additional steps? I mean, Daljit pointed out the broad things we need to do. In your opinion, what are the immediate steps that should be taken?
Thanks, Ashwini. As you mentioned, we have been working in some states, and then one thing that we have observed is that states are open to learn these things. Like there is no so they want to understand these things, and then that's why you see many agencies working in different states. So they're open to different models now. They're open to different capacity planning tools. They're open to getting advice from different people. So that's pretty encouraging from our side. But the challenge, as my previous speakers have mentioned so far, is the availability of data for them and also the capacity to do such kind of analysis. From my understanding, the data part, so Mr. Gupta also mentioned about the data as well. So, there are places where you can find data, and then maybe when we come to that part, I can elaborate more on that. But then on the capacity building side, we need to start right now. States are doing it and people are supporting them, but then it's important that we start building the capacity right now. And in terms of your second question on what steps they can take, as you saw in my one of the main slide of this presentation, the roadmap, there are some highest priority action, but then they are low effort. Those are the low hanging fruits. So those are the things that you can start doing right now. For example, you can start having more consultations with the stakeholders. So that's pretty easy, right? You can go, that would give you an indication of what people are thinking about different scenarios that you study, what sensitivity do you study. So those are the pretty easy thing, low hanging. For example, you can just make sure that your plan is sufficient in terms of reserve margin. So that's pretty easy. Just take, you can start with any number like 15%. You can start with 10%, you can start with 5%, but then at least make sure that you have some reserve margin. Then you can use more sophisticated techniques later to fine tune your reserve margin. You can start using capacity factors for your capacity credit. So the low hanging fruits, highest priority action, and low effort actions are the one that states can start doing it now.
Thanks, Mohit. So now coming to the second point we picked up, the data part. So all the panelists pointed out how data is a constraint to plan. And in fact, we had a session where again all the panelists agreed that uh, it's a severe constraint to plan or model for energy sector. But one perspective was that may be true for immediate planning, but that's not as big a constraint for long-term planning. But despite that, the consensus was that we need a more robust policy which is specific for energy sector data. And as Mohit, you pointed out here in presentation, so it's not just about in power sector data, but we also need information from other sectors like transport, building, which will have significant implications for power sector as well. So that's a point I just wanted to reflect, and if anyone has any remarks on that, we can pick up that, but that we have already discussed. Mm. So moving on to some of the audience questions. So one question is, in a delicensed economy, how relevant is long-term capacity planning, and what should be the horizon of planning in a delicensed economy?
Yeah, can I answer,
Yeah,
Praveen?
yeah.
Yeah, I think my friend has asked this question, Mr. Vijay Meghani. Meghani ji, you are very right that because it is a delicensed activity, we cannot force a technology to come or not. But I think these plans can give you direction, whether if you are planning for something, whether that will be cost effective in future, because he may not be aware of other technologies which are coming, like solar installation costs are coming down. With battery, it is becoming feasible to have a solar plus battery combination, which may be cheaper than the coal. So I think these kind of long-term plans can give you a direction in which we are moving, and what are the different technologies which are becoming cost competitive in future, so that power plant developers they can decide whether to go with that technology or not. Thank you.
And I would add on that that you would also see a shift from the need, you'd see more capacity building needed on the side of the regulator and also the system operator to set requirements for the types of capabilities and the types of grid services that are required. Not necessarily specifying a particular technology, but these are the requirements we have, these are the capabilities we need. And then as people kind of try to participate to provide those services, they need the capability to evaluate different technology mixes and make sure that the system does have adequate resources to meet all of those different requirements.
So, yeah, building on that, Emmy, I mean, I understand Mr. Gupta pointed out the need for a standard guidelines, and Daljit also made a similar point about we need a regulatory mandate for long-term planning. So, is it important to have some sort of policy mandate setting up an institutional process for regular and robust power system planning, or without that, it will be sort of need based and states will pick up? But as I understand, these are complex planning approaches, and what would be the perfect balance for that? I mean, do we need to mandate it, force it on mandate it on the utilities, or we take more softer approach and ask them to prepare more detailed plan at their level?
Is this for me or anyone? I think a policy mandate to conduct some type of long-term planning, and then do it regularly, and also involve, as Mohit has mentioned a couple times, a stakeholder consultation process is important. I wouldn't recommend being overly prescriptive about what that planning process has to look like, because the needs might be different in different states. I don't believe in complexity for the sake of complexity. Some states, because of their resource mix, because of their loan patterns, because of the structure of their power sector, the process might look different. But at a bare minimum, some kind of mandate that this planning process needs to happen regularly. It needs to involve stakeholder consultation. It needs to seek out a least cost mix of generation or supply options in general, to meet certain reliability standards. All of those things are important.
Thanks, Amy.
Yeah. Can I just add one thing, Ashwini? See, the thing is, we do need to say there needs to be some regulatory, and as Amy says, you don't want to make it too complicated. But if you remember from the work that we've done in some of the states, there are these what are called PP, power procurement regulations, or something they're called, and they're really bad, but they are there. So what we need to do is have a replacement of those regulations. See, clearly FOR is putting out some common regulations, but they are just, they're woefully inadequate. We need to start, at least put in some very basic thing saying, look, you need to be doing whatever, every 2 years, looking at what is your resource plan, and look at it on a system-wide basis, look at system costs, have a planning horizon of whatever you want to say, either 10 years, 12, 20 years, that sort of thing. I think it needs to be said. Otherwise, it'll be a long time before it happens. And unfortunately, I think state-owned discoms are in a much more difficult position. And I'm saying it's not because of the people there, it's the whole setup. Whereas the private guys are much more eager to do it because it's actually in their own interests. It's, there's an incentive. That company is going to be there for 20 years. They have to minimize their costs. So they're much more ready to do that. Whereas state discoms have their pushes and pulls, too many pushes and pulls. So we need a framework. It doesn't have to be very complicated, but it needs to be there.
Mr. Gupta, do you have any remarks on this?
Yeah, but the problem has been highlighted since last 2-3 years as RE has been growing. Then only because we were under deficit scenario, and whatever generation was coming was absorbed. So now only because of surplus capacity we are talking about all these aspects. And I think the suggestion given by Mr. Daljit is very good, that we should have a resource adequacy plan which should be submitted. Maybe frequency can be decided, which can give these utilities and the regulator some idea what are their plans and whether they are going for higher capacities, tie-ups. Like what is happening right now is that people are having so much capacity long-term tie-ups that the capital cost or the fixed cost which they are paying is so huge, and the whole burden is coming on the consumer. So I think having a resource adequacy plan will optimize all discoms and load serving entities to optimally utilize their capacities, so that the cost of generation can come down, and maybe the regulator can see whether the plans which a utility is having is optimized or not. That's all my comment.
Thank you, Mr. Gupta. So, okay, so we have a couple other clarificatory questions for you, Mohit. One question was in terms of the different plannings you suggested in energy justice analysis. So can you explain what you mean by that? And one particularly on how much PRM should be considered at state level, considered, and whether at state level or a standard 15% for all the
Sure,
youth.
sure. So, I mean, I think I answered that energy justice question live. So it's basically understanding the impact of a capacity expansion plan on the society and economics. So be it like how many jobs it will create or take out. So, I mean, all those societal and like economic impact of a plan is considered in a energy justice analysis. And we have tools to do that as well. On the second question of PRM, I think so. We have to take a step back and then see how it used to be. So PRM used to be like when there was no RE, people generally take 15% PRM because that would make sure that the LOLP is like within the target of like 1 in 10 years, 1 day in 10 years. So, but then as you have more RE, you need to like uh, fine tune your PRM. I mean, we generally take 15% still, and then I think that's sufficient. But then with more RE and then with more energy storage, I mean, you need to fine tune. I mean, the standard practice is between 13 to 17%, as I mentioned in US. But then you can still fine tune. I mean, the answer is that if you don't want to fine tune, go with like anything between 13% to 17%, be it 15% as well. But then if you want to like do that fine tuning as well, do a capacity expansion planning, go back and then check the resource adequacy of that plan, find out the LOLP. If the LOLP is like too low, you can like relax your PRM. If the LOLP is like too high, then you can like tighten the PRM value. So yeah, that's
Excellent. So one more question from audience. To what extent are issues of power planning linked to the norms around long-term PPAs? Would a shift to shorter PPAs, shorter duration PPAs, and more market-based purchase for RE enable a more nimble planning system? So any of the panelists can respond to that.
Yeah, if I can. See, I think while I understand the intention behind this push for shorter PPAs, what we have to remember is if you start having shorter PPAs, you're going to raise that price of. First of all, the cost of capital is going to go up because there's higher risk for investors. So that will happen. And see, look, an investor, if he puts in money, puts up a big solar plant for, and he expects to get his money back in 25 years. If he has a PPA only for 10 years, well, he'll increase the price, or he'll do, unless he's sure that he'll keep getting this. But if he thinks he's going to keep getting it, then why wouldn't you want to have long-term PPAs? So it's not, what I want to point out is that this having shorter-term PPAs is not as easy or a simple answer as it seems at first blush. And I think we need to be careful. The other thing is, if you look at markets need to be undergirded by some way of, you've got to have, otherwise if all your power is going into the market, you see all the volatility. So it's got to be undergirded by either long-term contract or these forward contracts, derivatives and so on. But it's not and because I know that one reason California had so much, why that market crashed in 2000 was because all their power was going through this thing. But if you look at the markets on the East Coast, they had, in New England, we had only 15% of the market of the power was going through the spot market, because there were long-term contracts that, so the volatility didn't affect consumer tariffs as much.
And I would add that, oh, sorry, were you done?
Go ahead. No, please go ahead.
Well, I would just add that long-term PPAs, they're not in conflict with long-term planning, because if we're starting to look out, instead of looking out 5 to 10 years, we're now looking out 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. and not just looking at, a business as usual or a reference scenario, but at a variety of different scenarios and sensitivities to see how the system may evolve. Suddenly investors have a much more robust long-term view of what is the investment climate, what are the opportunities for this technology in the power sector in the long term. And so it could actually help to facilitate rather than discourage long-term PPAs.
Yeah. I'm for long-term PPA. I'm not saying they're incompatible. All I'm saying is that actually, in a way, I'm agreeing with you. I'm saying that long-term, you want long-term. I mean, there's a value. I mean, they bring some value to the system, and not only that, if you start having short-term PPAs, the cost of power is going to go up. I mean, you're increasing the risk. And look at it this way: you've got an environment that is going to be very uncertain. So, if this is even more uncertain than it's been in the past. So if you've got, think of it from an investor's point of view, if you've got, you're looking ahead to a very uncertain future, well, are you going to, go for a short-term PPA? No, you'd want a long-term PPA to be assured that you'll get your money back.
So we're sort of left with 10 minutes, and the big point I'm sort of getting from the discussion is, so we sort of know what to do in terms of power system planning, and Mohit sort of presented that well, and so we know what to do, but the question is how to do. So 5 things that's coming up. One is we need a mandate for power system planning, which sort of sets a process for it. And second, a standard guideline, which sort of identifies common assumptions, common set of assumptions. Third, capacity to do this sort of planning. And fourth, coordination between various agencies and modeling groups or researchers working on this sort of aspect. And finally, data availability, on-time data availability, and transparency on this. So, that's my takeaway, but I sort of want to give a minute to each of the panelists to, India has this huge target of 450 gigawatt RE by 2030, and we are sort of on the track to 2021 target, but 450 is huge, and simultaneously EVs particularly are being pushed in a big way, and one way it could complement the variable RE, but on the other way it could further disrupt the system. So considering these forthcoming disruptions, what's the plan, and considering the limitations of our utilities and the ecosystem, so what are the 1 or 2 things we need to prioritize, Indian states utilities need to prioritize in terms of planning? So can I go in alphabetical order? Amy, first you.
Sure. So I think all of the things you hit on are really important. I would actually just add another one, which is sometimes overlooked, which would be the importance of working on how we communicate the results of these studies and educate our audience so that they understand what are the limitations? What are we actually learning from these planning studies? Whether this is a regulator, a ministry, or the general public, this is the responsibility of the modeling team to communicate that. And it doesn't just mean communicating the results of a reference case or a base case, but all of the alternative scenarios, because the reference case is not terribly useful without comparing it to other scenarios to see how sensitive those results are to changes in our assumptions.
Thanks. Daljit?
Yeah, I'm actually going to use this opportunity to answer a question in the chat box, and this was from Pranusha Kulkarni about what's the role of citizens in power system planning, and Amy actually, she talked about it a little. What I actually, unfortunately, I didn't have enough time to talk about it. It's uh, in our report, and um, I'll put a citation in the chat box. But Pranusha, the thing is that what we were suggesting is the way to do this planning is to start off with, like, when you start developing your scenario. So you start with scenario analysis, where you're laying out what are the objectives, what sort of uncertainties do you need to deal with it, what sort of possibilities should you consider. That point needs to be a very wide and participatory approach, and then you can get tighter and tighter as you do sensitivity analysis and probabilistic analysis, etc. But the idea is to start off right at the beginning with a much more creative and participatory and expansive exercise, and I think that's the place where where citizens can play a really important role. And please do look at our report. We discuss this in some more detail there. Thanks.
Thanks, Rajat. Mohit?
Thank you, Ashwini. I agree with whatever has been said so far, and then whatever has been summarized by Ashwini. Just to say some final word from my side. So we believe that that the people in Indian states, they acknowledge the fact that RE and storage requires changes in the system, the planning process. But as we discussed, that the availability of data and then also capacity at the state level is a problem right now. I mean, so the first suggestion would be start accumulating data, like, and more granular data. I mean, like, for example, if we talk about demand, like having a demand at the state level or the national level might not serve purpose in future. You might need like more, like, geographically more granular demand data, or maybe different sector wise data, like agriculture, different data. So that would help in better planning process. And then for the RE, we have, I mean, there are some resources. I mean, like, for example, NREL's RE Data Explorer, it has like 10 years of like solar data and then 1 or 2 years of wind data for every location in the country. So that can be used by the stakeholders right away. But then, as I mentioned in my roadmap, there are some low-hanging fruits that states can catch right now, start doing that improvements in the process, and then in long term, they should target having a model-based approach, because the future complexities would make them use that. So I think the time right now is correct that we start doing those changes in the system, and then think for a scenario of like 100% RE, or maybe like a majority of clean energy resources.
Thanks, Mohit. May I now request Mr. Gupta?
Yeah, I would like to add one more point to the list which you have summarized. One important point we have observed that if states are individually doing their own resource adequacy plan, if you combine all the states at national level, we may have excess capacity. So because India is a huge country, and we have seen that diversity plays a very major role in planning. So I would suggest that whenever a state is planning its own resource adequacy plan, is developing a resource adequacy plan, they should see the complementary load curves or complementary generations which are available, which they can tie up for some short time, like banking arrangements. Many states are doing that innovative thing. They are banking their power with another states, neighboring states, where so there is a complementary demand curve, and we can see that there can be a lot of savings because of that. You need not put generation capacity just to cater to that demand, which can be made available by the neighboring states. So I think states should take care of these things before they finalize their resource adequacy plan. And in my experience, this is very much important, because few states where we have done this kind of study, we found that in the neighboring state, if they could have done banking, the capacity requirement has come down. So these are my, otherwise, I think it was a good session which we had, and I think we have started the process of involving states in this modeling exercise, because they are all new. Even we are also new to the modeling. There's so much to learn about, and I hope and wish that in future many states will be using these modeling techniques to, because it is in the benefit of the consumer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gupta. In fact, this has been very insightful discussion, and we sort of agreed on certain concrete points to take away from here. Thank you, everyone, for this insightful discussion, and we are finishing nearly on time. And thanks for taking out your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Mohit.
Bye.